Today's recap is MacGruber. In the mountains of eastern Siberia, we witness the aftermath of a deadly battle where several men have fallen while escorting a convoy. We are introduced to Hoss, who we see take out a fleeing soldier. In the distance, several black SUVs approach, and Hoss goes to meet them. Next, we meet Dieter von Cunth, who wishes to inspect the contents of one of the transport vehicles, revealing it contains a nuclear warhead. Cunth orders it to be loaded up when suddenly a Russian voice objects. The soldier pleads desperately and then pleads some more, only for Cunth to admit he doesn't even speak Russian. Without hesitation, he pulls out a strange-looking translation device that looks suspiciously similar to a gun before firing it at the soldier. Now, in Ecuador, we're introduced to the back of MacGruber's head. Despite his meditation being interrupted, he greets Colonel Faith, who is there looking for the best, returning the greeting with a cheeky, "Hello, MacGruber." MacGruber asks how they found him, and Colonel Faith responds, "You forget I taught you everything you know." MacGruber does a backflip from the floor and retorts, "Not everything." We're then introduced to MacGruber properly. Happy to see one another, the two men shake hands, and as the Colonel introduces the legendary soldier to Piper, who begins to recite the man's achievements from memory. Former Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, and Green Beret. Served 6 tours in Desert Storm, 4 in Bosnia, 3 each in Angola, Somalia, Mozambique, Nicaragua, and Sierra Leone. Recipient of 16 Purple Hearts, 3 Congressional Medals of Honor, 7 Presidential Medals of Bravery, and starting tight end for the University of Texas, El Paso. MacGruber comments that all of that was a long time ago and respectfully tells the Colonel that whatever he's there to ask, the answer is no. The Colonel dismisses Piper and confides in MacGruber, telling him he's their last hope. MacGruber, however, believes he's already given enough to his country and starts to walk away, prompting Faith to follow and mention the name Casey. This triggers a strong reaction in MacGruber, who insists it's not about her, but a promise he made to himself. When the Colonel mentions Cunth, MacGruber is visibly taken aback and asks, "What?" Colonel Faith tells him this is his chance to finally take him down. Despite the appeal, MacGruber still says he can't do it. The Colonel hands him a dossier in case MacGruber changes his mind. That night, MacGruber tosses and turns in his sleep, dreaming about the day he married a woman named Casey. Just after she says, "I do," MacGruber spots Cunth in the distance, holding a detonator. He then notices a block of explosives hidden in the Bible. Cunth activates the detonator, and MacGruber jolts awake, screaming in rage. Later, we see MacGruber standing over the headstone of his late wife and his own. He digs up his grave, revealing that the coffin only contains his gear. An epic montage follows, showing the legendary soldier getting dressed and retrieving a key. Arriving at the Pentagon, MacGruber storms in and declares, "I'm in," to a group of janitors eating lunch who have no idea what he's talking about. The second time, though, is the charm. Colonel Faith sees him and exclaims, "Good God," to which MacGruber responds, "Your God can't help you, Jim, but I can." MacGruber asks for a debrief, and Piper begins to share what they know. MacGruber then turns to the lieutenant and says, "I was actually talking to the Colonel." Faith confirms that everything Piper just said is correct, and MacGruber thanks him, emphasizing Colonel as he stares at Piper before excusing himself to go pound some Cunth. Faith stops him, explaining it's not that simple. Piper adds that, to the outside world, Cunth is a respectable businessman and major political donor, making him untouchable. MacGruber calls Piper a rookie and declares that he'll touch Cunth wherever he wants. The Colonel then shows MacGruber that Cunth has assembled a ruthless team, but this doesn't discourage MacGruber, who vows to assemble his own dream team of killer stoppers. Colonel Faith is thrilled to hear MacGruber's commitment and immediately recommends Piper, stating that he's one of the best men they have and would make a great second in command. MacGruber responds with a better idea, "No fucking way," before leaving the room. Piper follows and tries to reason with MacGruber, but MacGruber only questions his experience, informing the lieutenant that his shit does stink and that it smells like shit. Piper just asks for a shot, to which MacGruber responds, "Give this a shot," before headbutting him. MacGruber then excuses himself, collecting his car, and setting off to assemble his dream team. His first recruit is Frank. The two share a hug and reminisce before MacGruber reveals he needs him for the team he's putting together. We then meet Tut, who also needs no convincing. Vernon is incentivized with a grenade as payment and signs on. Tut is happy to help, and Tanker glad to see MacGruber again, agrees to provide his services. Brick also agrees, but it turns out MacGruber is a massive homophobe and decides not to bring him on board. Finally, Vicky is the last member on his list. Upon finding her, she tells MacGruber that she thought he was dead. He proceeds to tell her about the team he's assembling, and although she's happy for him, she rejects the offer. A flashback reveals that she was in attendance at MacGruber and Casey's wedding and witnessed the explosion that took her best friend's life. MacGruber tells her they're hunting Cunth, but Vicky says music is her life now. He leaves her a note in case she changes her mind. We cut to an airfield where MacGruber's team is assembled in a van, chanting as Mac goes to deal with the brass. While Colonel Faith takes a phone call, MacGruber asks Piper how his nose is doing. The lieutenant replies with a simple, "fine," followed by a sarcastic, "I just banged it into a giant cat." MacGruber laughs and insults Piper by saying, "I bet you wish your nose was a dick so you could use it to frick butts," before calling him ugly. Piper retorts with, "I think you're looking in a mirror," which visibly irks MacGruber, who then asks Piper if he wants to go. The colonel returns and inquires about the dream team. MacGruber begins listing off the names of everyone he recruited and expresses full confidence in their ability to complete the mission. Faith suggests Mac reconsider adding Piper to the team, but Mac responds that the van is already pretty full. He starts gloating about the achievements of each team member, condescendingly reaffirming that there's no room for Piper, not even in the trunk, which is filled with explosives that MacGruber packed himself. As this is being explained, the van explodes in the background. MacGruber, in disbelief, runs toward the wreckage, calling for Tug and asking if everyone is okay, before desperately pleading for someone to call 911. Later, the colonel, now in his office, compliments the funerals before informing Mac that he's taking him off the case, something the legendary soldier strongly objects to. Mac slams his hand down on the desk, exclaiming that he can't do that, insisting that he's their best chance. However, Faith believes he has no choice. He tells MacGruber that he's too close to the mission, and without a team, he's not willing to take the risk. He apologizes before leaving the room. Mac sits down in disappointment, and Piper enters, looking for the colonel. MacGruber tells him that they're kicking him off the mission and asks for his help. Piper says he can't do it, but MacGruber drops to his knees, begging for his help. Desperate, he offers to suck Piper's pipe, get freaky with any object in the room, or even with Piper himself. Flustered, Piper shuts the door, only to turn around to see MacGruber with his pants around his ankles. He yells at Mac to pull his pants up, leading the legendary soldier to have a legendary breakdown. Piper tries to console him, saying things aren't that bad. Mac, in a fit of rage, admits they are when the man who killed his wife has a nuke and he can't do anything about it. Piper, surprised to learn Cunth was responsible for his wife's murder, offers his condolences. The colonel then enters upon this bizarre scene to inform Mac that his helicopter is ready to take him home. As MacGruber leaves with his head hanging low, Piper says he's in. However, Faith doesn't think two people make a team. Just then, an unseen voice says, "But three do," and Vicky appears. Having heard what happened, she thought Mac might need some help. The colonel, now satisfied, agrees to proceed with the mission. As the trio arrive at a nightclub, someone in a passing vehicle insults Mac's car, which angers him. He takes note of the license plate, KFBR 392, and repeatedly mutters it to himself. Once inside the club, MacGruber demands the music be turned off, grabs a microphone, and takes Vicky hostage, only to admit she's with him and is safe. However, he can't say the same for the rest of the crowd as he throws a glass into the audience. He calls them all pieces of doo-doo, assuming they're associates of Cunth. MacGruber reveals his name and spells it out for them before throwing the mic into a glass wall behind him. He informs the turds of where he'll be tomorrow and tells them to spread the word. Piper questions this strategy, thinking Mac blew his advantage by revealing to Cunth that he's not actually dead, and he asks what the plan is. MacGruber admits he doesn't have one and just goes with the flow. As they leave, we can still hear Mac reciting the license plate from earlier. The next morning, Piper walks in on Vicky, who is disguised as MacGruber, something she doesn't seem too thrilled about, as Mac intends to use her as bait. MacGruber stresses that he won't let Cunth or his men lay a hand on her, which Vicky appreciates. He continues by telling her not to worry before awkwardly complimenting her by saying she looks really pretty. At the sting location, MacGruber informs Vicky that if anything goes wrong, they're about 20 blocks away. As Mac walks Vicky through how he would order a drink, the van he and Piper are in is suddenly struck by a hail of gunfire. Piper keeps his cool, but MacGruber starts to panic, as does Vicky. Mac manages to start the van with the help of a mop, using it to push down on the accelerator, and by sheer dumb luck, they run over Hoss. Mac reassures Vicky of their safety, and embarrassed by her own behavior, she awkwardly takes her leave. The trio reunite, and after searching Hoss's car, they find money in the trunk. Piper figures Hoss was going to use it to buy passcodes for the warhead, which Mac pretends he also figured out. Finding a GPS in the car, Piper thinks a deal was set to take place at a nearby railyard. However, with Hoss dead, he believes the meeting won't happen. Until MacGruber chimes in, saying, "Who said Hoss isn't going to show up?" before glancing over at Vicky Ruber. We see Vicky now rocking a Hoss disguise, with Piper dressed as MacGruber for no apparent reason. Mac points out that there are 3 guards and explains his plan, which mostly consists of winging it. Piper Ruber hands him a gun, but Mac refuses, saying guns are for the weak and stupid, adding no offense as he looks back at Piper. The guards hear a bird call, putting them on high alert. Acting as a distraction, MacGruber reveals himself by popping out from behind the corner of a wall, fully nude, with a piece of celery sticking out of his bum. He signals Piper by shouting, "Now!" who swiftly deals with all 3 guards. Piper, impressed by Mac's strategy, goes over to express this, and Mac takes full responsibility for taking those 3 dudes out, even detailing how one uses the celery in order to replicate the distraction, something Piper never ever wants to learn, prompting MacGruber to say never ever, say never ever. Now overseeing the deal, Mac radios for Vicky to continue with the plan. He reassures her as she walks into the warehouse that they'll think she's Hoss, and it'll take a while for them to figure out something's up. However, upon seeing her, one man immediately calls out, "That's not Hoss!" and everyone begins firing wildly in her direction. She flees while Piper returns fire, as Mac flails around to make a homemade grenade. As one henchman drives off with the codes, Piper takes aim, but Mac stops him, saying he's got this one. He throws the improvised device at the fleeing vehicle, but it only lets out a puff of smoke, allowing the car to get away. Vicky then shows up and says she lost the money. They're able to recover a phone from one of Cunth's henchmen. It begins to ring, and the trio hook it up to a call tracer. Piper reminds MacGruber that he has to keep the caller on the line long enough to get a location. MacGruber immediately calls the person on the other end a piece of poo, tells them his friends are dead, and threatens the caller, who promptly hangs up. MacGruber's personal phone then begins to ring. It's the colonel on the other end, asking for an update on the mission and mentioning Cunth's fundraising event taking place that night. He tells Mac to use this as an opportunity for surveillance, not wanting Cunth to know he is alive, unaware that Mac has already blown this advantage. So naturally, MacGruber goes to the event, entering in a flamboyant and high-profile fashion. Meanwhile, Piper discovers Mac's notebook, which has no useful information, but is filled page after page, after page after page, of an insane hyper-obsession with KFBR 392 and its driver. MacGruber meets up with Vicky and compliments her appearance. She points out one guy who could be connected to Cunth, labeling him as handsome, which seems to make Mac jealous. He then suggests she should leave the case and just go marry him. MacGruber also points out a random butler he believes is full of intel and warns her to stay away from the other guy, whom he describes as ugly. Mac walks in on a poker game that Cunth is sitting in on, confidently declaring he's bluffing. Another player runs with this, going all in. Cunth reveals a straight flush, and his opponent, who turns out to be a senator, yells out in defeat. MacGruber asks about the warhead and mentions he ran into Cunth's dream team before they were dead. Cunth plays dumb about the warhead and says it's too bad about the team, explaining that he had assembled them only to put them in a room with a bunch of homemade explosives. MacGruber is gobsmacked and responds, "You're shitting me? Well, we have a lot in common because I basically did the same thing." Cunth then reveals that he didn't actually blow up his own guys because he isn't mentally handicapped. MacGruber tells him he has a new team and they're going to stop him. Cunth doubts this, calling in his goons, and MacGruber details how he's going to disable each and every one of them, even threatening to rip Cunth's dick off before shoving it in his mouth. The next scene shows MacGruber being thrown out a window, with one of the goons breaking his car stereo. Vicky notices the senator being handed a file, and it appears he is being blackmailed to fulfill a task. However, MacGruber continues to express jealousy over her paying attention to other men. Back at the Pentagon, the Colonel reprimands MacGruber for going in and believes him to be a liability, so he takes him off the mission, this time for real. MacGruber goes to leave, but before doing so, he offers to suck the Colonel's dick in order to stay on. Faith apologizes and tells him it's over. Later, MacGruber sits with Piper and Vicky and takes full responsibility for what has happened. Piper thanks him, showing him what not to do. Vicky then excuses herself, and Piper asks MacGruber when he's going to make his move. MacGruber reveals that after his late wife passed away, he promised himself that he'd never be with another woman, and to this day, he has no idea why Cunth took her life. He explains that they all went to college together and used to be close friends. After graduation, Cunth got engaged to Casey, and MacGruber was set to be his best man. It was around that time that he started getting freaky with Casey, and while she was carrying Cunth's child, she left Cunth to be with MacGruber, who convinced her to get rid of the baby so they could start fresh. Piper finds the entire situation uncomfortable. MacGruber apologizes for his behavior towards Piper, admitting it was because he felt threatened by him. Just then, noticing an ambush, MacGruber jumps behind Piper to use him as cover from a barrage of bullets, giving himself protection to make it to his car, where he makes off with Vicky in the passenger seat. Surprisingly, Piper survives the ordeal thanks to the bulletproof vest he's wearing. Piper demands to be let out after finding out he was used as a human shield. As MacGruber drops Vicky off at home, it turns out he was shot in the leg, so he comes inside to have the bullet removed. While she removes the bullet, she reveals her feelings after he asks why she never settled down. The two share a kiss and get a little freaky, but as soon as things cool down, MacGruber runs out of the house and drives away. Now at his wife's grave, he kneels down to say sorry, feeling he's betrayed her. Ghost Casey appears behind him and tells him it's okay to move on. Not knowing what to say, he begins to kiss the apparition, and the two get freaky, though from the perspective of the groundskeeper, MacGruber is clearly tripping. As MacGruber leaves the cemetery, he sees it, KFBR 392. He begins destroying the car, just as the Colonel calls to give him an update on the situation. The warhead has been recovered, and apparently Cunth wasn't even involved. However, Mac doesn't buy it. He's adamant it's all a distraction. A newspaper headline shows a State of the Union address, which MacGruber believes to be the real target. Faith thinks that's outlandish and suggests MacGruber take a vacation. But MacGruber has a better idea. He's going to go save the world. It's revealed that the senator from the poker game was the one who updated the Colonel on the situation. He apologizes to Faith and tells him he had no choice before pulling out a gun and firing. MacGruber returns to Vicky's place to find it trashed, then receives a call from Cunth, who gloats. Mac manages to hook up a tracing device and stall long enough to get a location. MacGruber gears up and meets with Piper. He apologizes for his rookie mistake the night before, but Piper shuts him down, stressing that he's there to save all the innocent lives at stake. The two sneak into Cunth's safe house, dispatching henchmen along the way. MacGruber continues to use his signature throat rip move as they go deeper into the facility. Mac explains that he's adopted the bowling term turkey to throat rips and is only one away from achieving it. Piper thinks he's sick. MacGruber then says he'll suck as many dicks as it takes to get that warhead and grabs a PA system to taunt Cunth, revealing that both he and Piper are in the control room with a little surprise. As goons enter the room, a tiny cup of water trap spills but misses all of them, revealing a corpse holding up a sign. MacGruber and Piper continue through the facility, and Mac believes that the trap has bought them some serious time, just as they begin to take gunfire. Piper urges MacGruber to pick up a gun to help fight, but Mac insists he doesn't do guns and that all he needs is a brown egg. After Piper insists, Mac admits that he doesn't know how to use a gun and that they scare him. Piper tells him he needs to do this to save Vicky and explains that he just has to point and shoot. MacGruber reluctantly takes the gun and shoots aimlessly, hitting absolutely nothing, but finds the experience awesome. He and Piper decide they need to get out of the situation as Mac continues to miss every shot, while Piper deals with the henchmen. One armed man gets the drop on the pair, and instead of using Piper as a human shield, MacGruber actually leaps in front of him. Thankfully, the goon's gun jams, and Piper is able to take him out. To thank Mac for saving his life, Piper tells him to go for the throat rip. However, the henchman wakes up and pulls out two blades. MacGruber grabs Piper and uses his arm to complete a throat rip, achieving a turkey and gobbling over the man in victory. The pair find Vicky, but one of Cunth's dream team appears behind them and captures all three, taking them to Cunth and the warhead. MacGruber says he can't wait to kill Cunth, and Cunth retaliates by mocking his throat rip move. Mac responds that he wants his throat intact, as he still plans to fulfill his promise of ripping Cunth's dick off and shoving it down his throat. Cunth reveals he's being paid to use the warhead and plans to blame MacGruber for it, retroactively blaming Casey's death on him as well, showing a manifesto in MacGruber's name. Mac pleads that he didn't write it and doesn't know who did, begging Cunth to believe him. Frustrated by his stupidity, Cunth admits that he was the one who wrote it and reveals that Colonel Faith is dead and they're all next. But first, he says, there's something he has to do. Cut off MacGruber's mullet. After doing so, Cunth mocks the legendary soldier, pushing Mac to truly lose it. Mac goes on a throat-ripping spree, taking out everyone, even performing an epic backflip, while Piper distracts another goon with the classic celery trick. Vicky takes care of the goon, and MacGruber deals with Cunth, cuffing him to a boiler so he can focus on disarming the warhead. With time ticking, Mac proposes to Vicky, and she says yes. He then turns to disarm the missile, but is overwhelmed by the number of wires and admits he doesn't know what he's doing. Piper questions if he can even do it, and MacGruber bluntly states that he cannot. Cunth mocks his incompetence, but Mac interrupts, saying he wasn't finished, and successfully removes the nuclear core and guidance system. However, the missile is still set to detonate, giving the trio just 32 seconds to escape the facility. They leave Cunth behind, with MacGruber offering a cheeky toodaloo. But as the countdown hits 0, Cunth notices an axe within reach, just before the facility explodes. 6 months later, we see MacGruber and Vicky getting married, with Colonel Faith having survived. As vows are being exchanged, a burnt Cunth, now with a hook for a hand, appears in the distance and fires a rocket launcher at the couple. Max saves his wife, and the rocket hits the Reverend instead. A scuffle ensues, but MacGruber gains the upper hand. He's thrilled to see Cunth, as he can finally fulfill his promise. Only there's one problem. The explosion has left Cunth, well, blank. Upset by this, Mac pushes him through a thin wall, and Cunth begins to fall down a cliff. MacGruber yells for Piper, who throws him a gun, and MacGruber unloads on the falling man, sending him to his death. Mac shouts, "Fuck you, dude," before shooting a grenade at Cunth's remains and further humiliating him with a golden shower. MacGruber then turns around and says, "I do." And that's MacGruber. Thank you all so much for watching, and a special thanks to all the new subscribers. Be sure to gobble on that like button if you enjoyed. Today's word of the day is bumpkin, which means an awkward, simple, or unsophisticated person. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, bye-bye.